The Calusa Waterkeepers is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of the Calusa River and its estuaries, Lake Okeechobee, the Nicodemus Slough, thank you. Charlotte Harbor, Estero Bay, the nearshore waters of Lee County, and their watersheds. And through education and promotion of responsible use and enjoyment by all people. So I'm going to turn it over to Casey Schulberg, who is the Executive Director, and he will tell you more about tonight's agenda.
But we're really indebted to Bruce over here for concocting the idea and contacting Bill, and then Commodore Hudson, who came to see the movie a couple weeks ago down at Silver Spot in Naples. So we're really, really thrilled to have you turn out in such numbers. I visited the landings for the first time yesterday, and I'm used to going into gated communities, but this is different. I drove by the tennis courts, and usually there's like one person on the tennis court. It was like Wimbledon. There's people everywhere. Balls getting batted left and right. I walked by the community center. They were speaking French. The cafe was full, and then I heard that you had a pool party for 400 people last night. It's making me rethink my housing accommodations in Southwest Florida. This seems like a nice place to be. Yeah. So, Calusa Waterkeeper, as Bill said, we're a nonprofit. We're part of the International Waterkeeper Alliance that was founded in 1996 by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. There are 340 chapters on 6 continents all over the world, patrolling water and trying to improve the water conditions all over the world. We have a jurisdiction which covers 1,000 square miles, all of Lake Okeechobee, the Calusa River, the estuaries of the Calusa stretching from Charlotte Harbor all the way down to Bonita. And we're working hard to try to educate people and try to improve the water quality in the area. So we're basically an education and advocacy group. Occasionally we get into litigation. We're actually involved in 2 petitions presently, one against the Army Corps of Engineers and one with Florida Department of Environmental Protection. We're quite involved in regulatory advice when we can. We're very happy that the governor, who's come out swinging on the water quality issue, has adopted 2 of our real talking points into his executive action, so we're pleased about that. We've made a lot of progress. We feel a groundswell of interest in this issue. The turnout tonight is a testament to how curious people are, how concerned people are. So we'll get into that a little bit. We're going to show a movie in a few minutes, but before we do that, I want to introduce our partner, John Cassani, who's the waterkeeper. Most waterkeepers have a waterkeeper, and a lot of them have an executive director, so I kind of handle the administrative chores, and John is our chief scientist. He's our chief advocacy expert, and arguably there's nobody who knows more about what's going on in our local waterways, and also about the regulatory environment than John Cassani. So I'm going to ask him to just talk for a few minutes about what you're experiencing locally on the waterways. So, John?
Thanks, Casey. We call him the silver-tongued devil. He does so much for us. We're really a team operation there. There is just one waterkeeper per member organization, but we are a strong team. Just by way of introduction, I moved to Southwest Florida in 1978. And I came at this environmental advocacy thing through a background in applied and basic research in the area of water science. So I had a little bit of a good foundation for advocacy, and I rely on that quite a bit. I'd like to get a feel for what perceptions you're getting about the harmful algal bloom issues we've had over the years. And I'd like to get a feel for who's in the audience and what kind of their perception is. How many folks were living in this community March through maybe June of 2016?
Of what year?
Oh,
2016.
How about, I know some are seasonal residents, and that's okay. But how about June through November of 2018? Okay, so you know the harmful algal bloom story and problem. I've given probably a little over 100 presentations in the last 18 months. People are desperate for information on this problem in the context of their health, their business, the local economy, the future of the region. And what I've tried to do is I guess my cumulative outlook would be that folks fall into three categories that have experienced these harmful algal blooms. And these represent business people, medical professionals, real estate, finance, you name it. And so in the first group, I kind of characterize it as folks that are pretty desperately optimistic. Okay, I'm going to give it to you straight. Okay, so these are folks that are in business, perhaps real estate, perhaps the tourism industry, perhaps hotel and restaurant, and they're betting. They're making a bet on their strategy for life that this has been an anomaly the last 5 or 6 years, and that they're betting the probabilities and odds that it'll get better and it won't reoccur the way it's occurred over the last decade or so. So I kind of call that desperate optimism. They're depending on aggressive marketing, and they're depending on creating perceptions that it will get better, and perhaps they're right. Perhaps they are correct. I'm not casting judgment. There's the second group. I would call them cautiously optimistic, and they're a little more pragmatic about the whole issue. They acknowledge that there are global drivers to the problem with climate change and sea level rise and extreme hydrology. There's a recognition that the regulatory system isn't working very well in Florida, depending on your perspective from any context. It just isn't working very well. And there's some trends at work, and these folks understand and are pretty dependent on where these trends are going in terms of where they're going to go in the future, in the next 5, 10 years. These folks have more of a long view on the issue, as opposed to the folks in the first group have maybe a little shorter view, okay? People in the middle group, number 2 group, they've lived here probably a long time and they want to stay, and they've made the decision they're going to stay here and they're going to engage the problem and try to fix it. The third group is somewhat tragic in a way, and a lot of people call me and they say, I'm gone, I've moved, I've left, I don't trust government to fix it, and I've made a decision to move on. And these aren't just the vagabond types, these are some pretty significant investors in the area of real estate in the community, and so it's tragic to hear that. So I've gotten a lot of perceptions over the years. When you see this movie, I'd be interested in hearing more about what your perceptions might be, as where you think we should be going or where we are going. That seems to be the $66,000 question.
From the Southwest Florida Community Foundation, we were able to make the movie, and we did another 2 town halls this year on public health with expert panels. Some of them were in the movie. And we did a CME, which I've learned is a continuing medical education course for doctors, which we did with Lee Health. So we did that about a month ago with Lee Health, and that was organized by Dr. Robert Zarantz, who you saw in the movie, with the help of Holly, who helped put that together. That was our first continuing medical education course for doctors. Because part of our effort is to get the information into the hands of the doctors so they can turn around and inform their patients. There's a lot of misinformation about these diseases and these toxins. So we felt it was necessary to push that out into the medical community so that they could in turn inform their patients. And we're now working on one for nurses, which Holly is working on, and we're working on one for physician's assistants. So we'll be working on that actively over the next 6 months to try to get the word out. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the panelists just to speak for 2 minutes about their view on this issue, and then we're going to open it up to your questions, which we're really eager to hear. So John?
I already already had a little intro, so I think I'll pass the torch.
Can't hear it.
Passing the torch. Well, so I became a Calusa Waterkeeper Ranger, trained by John Cassani through his Waterkeeper Academy over a year ago. And in that year, I discovered that I had a unique role that I could play because I have a background in public health, and as a public health nurse, and before that in infant and maternal health care. So it was really easy for me to find my niche a little bit with the Calusa Waterkeeper organization, and I can't say enough how proud I am, and also how challenging, what a good challenge it's been for me to really learn the science of the water where I live. I live right by the Midpoint Bridge on a little street, one house up from the Caloosahatchee River. And we've watched it change a lot over the years. So my biggest bailiwick since I joined the Waterkeeper organization and then became a ranger was to find out why the Department of Health, the Florida Department of Health and the Lee County Health Department would not post signs on the places where we as Calusa Waterkeeper Rangers were testing and finding that the waters are severely impaired. Not only with cyanobacteria when there's a bloom and the red tide blooms that are out on our coast right now, but many of our waterways also test very, very high with fecal indicator bacteria. So myself and John and a few others of us in the Calusa Waterkeeper organization have been really pushing and asking and knocking on the doors and creating conversations so that there would be more communication between our Florida DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, and the Florida Department of Health. Because the mission of the Florida Department of Health is to protect the health of all the people in Florida. Yet, because they only will post signs if water is impaired only on beaches that are considered part of their Healthy Beach program, they will not post a sign, even if the water is extremely dangerous. And so what I'm doing, what I'm very excited about, it was really an honor to work with Dr. Robert Durand, and then to be there as he presented a 1-hour presentation to a group of Lee physicians at Florida Gulf Coast Hospital. It was broadcast to all the other 3 hospitals too, and was fairly well attended, but that's just the start. We need to educate our nurses as well as our doctors, and so part of the grant that we got is for us to do this continuing education with medical professionals, and we're partnering with a wonderful group of nurses called ANHE, let's see if I get it right, the Association for Nurses for a Healthy Environment. And they're going to help us not only produce a continuing education program for nurses here in Lee County, but then to take it nationwide. Because we need this education. These algae blooms are happening all over the country. But we've been ground zero here, and what some of these doctors, like Dr. Bradley and also Dr. Cox, really recommended that we open up a CDC field office here in Southwest Florida. And I really want to try to help make that happen. It would take a lot of citizen participation. I know I've spoken for more than 2 minutes, and you probably have a lot of questions. But I want to thank you all for being here. Please get engaged, stay engaged, speak up, and be safe. If you see blue-green algae in the water, then report it. But don't go near it, don't drink it, and don't eat the fish and the shellfish locally. Truly, as a public health nurse, I'm saying do not eat seafood that comes from these waters right now. So I like to leave you with a message of help. I do have hope. I do have grounded optimism because of this organization, but we need a lot of help and a lot of support right now to get our what is it? 85 waterkeeper rangers now are ready to cover this entire watershed. So I'm very excited about that. We're going to need some help organizing them. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Tracy Matev. I'm an internal medicine physician here locally in town. So basically why I decided to do these panels with the wonderful Calusa Waterkeeper is because I want to raise awareness to inform the public of the health risks associated with the harmful algae blooms, because the Florida Department of Health, as Holly mentioned, is not doing enough for us. It's not informing the public, it's not posting signs. So we as healthcare professionals, as physicians, we took an oath to take care of our community, to help them, in any way we can, to prevent diseases, to help them become healthier. So I'm trying my best. Calusa Waterkeepers are amazing. They have taken this responsibility. They have done everything in their power, and they need all the help from you guys. Whatever amount of donations you guys can give us, give them, that would be awesome. I had to get that out there because they're using their own resources for testing the waters, sending their rangers out there. So they're doing everything. The Florida Department of Health, unfortunately, has not stepped it up. So I just wanted to get that out there. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This movie basically was focused on public health. We're really focused on trying to solve the problem, the underlying problem. And John, we're pretty read up on this subject, and there's a whole bunch of things that need to be done almost simultaneously. So I'm going to let John weigh in.
Well, unquestionably, the underlying problem with cyanobacteria blooms is nitrogen and phosphorus, excess nitrogen and phosphorus. It didn't get this way overnight. In the context of Lake Okeechobee is one example, it took decades. And really the sad part is the legacy issues of that phosphorus pollution continue to this day and continue to get worse. So it's a little bit of a complex problem. You don't want to hear that. But it is, unfortunately. And so our bedrock laws and rules, like the Clean Water Act, hardly regulate agriculture at all. They're essentially exempt from the same regulations that urban developers have to do and create stormwater treatment. So that's really frustrating. But not to disparage agriculture completely. There are other land uses that I suppose that could be more damaging. But so how do we get nitrogen phosphorus to go down? And I think there's some things you can do at the community level. You're aware there is a fertilizer ordinance in Lee County. I'm not sure how many people are aware of that, and I'm not sure how well enforced that is. But you've seen Don't Feed the Monster things on TV from time to time. So that's one thing folks can do. But we traditionally support agriculture. We support government to address these problems in many contexts. And we have an atmosphere now in Washington where deregulation, including environmental deregulation, is rabid. It's becoming undone at an amazingly distressing pace. We're seeing Governor DeSantis step up a little bit. I'm not sure you can buy your way out of this problem, but for every pound of nitrogen and phosphorus we reduce, the explosion of growth adds another 2 pounds. So we rarely hear the net change in the context of how we can address this problem. It's pretty much disguised. So it's extremely frustrating to be an advocate in this day and age. Everybody wants to solve this problem. But it is a little bit complex, and I wish I could give you a silver bullet, one thing that would fix the over-nutrient enrichment problem, but it's extremely complex. I just went to a meeting last week, and the South Florida Water Management District is revising their works of the district rule. And one of the things they're looking at is phosphorus in agriculture north of the lake, largely agriculture. But they wouldn't go as far as to say we're going to control nutrients at the source. They just wouldn't go there. They wouldn't go that far. So it's extremely frustrating to deal with that.
Should be taken?
Absolutely. We should be controlling nutrients at the source. So the paradigm in Florida and most of the rest of the country is that we kind of homogenize the impacts and the costs so it's spread across everybody. Everybody pays a little bit to clean it up. But we have these major polluters that are creating 70 and 80% of the annual loads to these water bodies. They're not paying their fair share. Okay? So you hear about the C43 reservoir just up the river here. That's $600 or $700 billion. And the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, which is over $1 billion. I think it's like $2.2 billion. That's public bailout. That's corporate welfare, in my opinion. So we need more equity in who pays and who benefits. And, you know, a lot of that comes from the outcome of the ballot box. And we're just not seeing that kind of reform in Florida. So as desperate as we are to try to reform this problem, it's a continuing dilemma for Florida and for residents in Florida in many ways. So I didn't want to hog this microphone. The answer is yes, yes, no, and yes. Did that help? So the captains are right. The captains have put a lot of emphasis on that one project, and it will be beneficial. What the federal agencies are telling us, the planning agencies are telling us, it will reduce harmful discharges down the Caloosahatchee by 60%. But what they're not telling you is that you only get to 60% if you complete all the other regional projects. So it's not just the reservoir's impact, and they don't say that out loud very often. I find that pretty frustrating. So it will help. I don't want to be a naysayer, but where most of that water goes from the Everglades Agricultural Area will go into this reservoir. That's almost 800,000 acres of stormwater runoff that will fill up that reservoir, those stormwater treatment areas and the conservation areas. That's not equity in treatment. So where does the water go that needs to be treated in Lake Okeechobee if the EAA completely fills those treatment areas that, by the way, are 98% paid for by the public? So again, I'm getting back to those equity issues. You know, we need a little more equity in who pays and who benefits to get a real solution to these issues. And if you think those are simple in Florida, ain't happening yet.
Well, you know, Big Sugar, after a lawsuit about 20 years ago, stopped back pumping into Lake Okeechobee. So they're not contributing to the harmful algae blooms that we saw last year in Lake Okeechobee at present. They are mostly cleaning their water and sending it south. But what they do is they have managed the system in such a way that they have perfect drought control and perfect flood control. So if they have too little water, they call the Army Corps of Engineers and they get the water they need from Lake Okeechobee. If they have too much water, they offload it into the canals, which are operated by the Army Corps of Engineers. And when those canals get too high and they create a public health risk, then the Army Corps of Engineers is allowed to back pump that into the lake. So that didn't account for a whole lot, but it accounted for about 1 to 2% of the back pumping into the lake. But that's not our chief beef with Big Sugar. They back pumped into the lake for decades, and there's 6 feet of legacy sludge on the bottom of Lake Okeechobee that is their gift to us. That's one issue that should be addressed. The second issue is that they're not selling their land and allowing that water to flow south. So that's not helpful. And the third issue is that they're just disingenuous, and there's no shared adversity. They have it really made, and they've had record bumper crops, and this is a federally subsidized industry, by the way. So we're paying them to operate their crops, and they're getting perfect perfect conditions to operate their crops, and the communities on the east and west coast are suffering, and that just does not seem to be fair. So those are my chief beefs with Big Sugar. Not so much that they're contributing to the harmful algae blooms. However, the water that they're sending south is very nitrogen heavy, and that's probably contributing to the harmful algae blooms that we're seeing in Florida Bay. That's what Dr. Larry Brand is talking about that.
So it's almost been a light year and change from 2016 to 2019. So FDEP now has they call a harmful algal bloom reporting website. I think they call it the HAB dashboard or something like that. So you can visit that site. I believe there's a link on our website to it. The really good part of that, though, is that for the first time, and as long as I can remember, the 40 years I've been doing this, FDP will come if you tell them that you think you see an algae bloom. So part of this website is for reporting. Actually come and test, and they'll tell you if there's toxins present, and they'll tell you what species are involved. So that's really important. That's a big improvement. So good question, and I hope that answered it.
Prior to the movie, you talked a lot about the Rangers, the Calusa Rangers. Many of the people in here are boaters. Is it good for us to be a ranger? What do they do? How to become a ranger?
Yeah, appreciate that question. And we just kind of stumbled onto that program just because we were overwhelmed with the size of our project area, the size of the problems. We offer 2 academies, typically one in late spring and then one in late in the year, like November, December. We just finished one up. So if you stay tuned to either our social media or our website, we'll announce when the next one will be. We try to keep the classes to about 20, which is about the best size. And what they do is we have a session on policy, we have a session on how aquatic ecosystems work, and you'd be surprised how many folks, especially if you moved here from a temperate zone area, how differently these aquatic systems work from, let's say, Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan. Totally different world here. Our recreational season is longer, our growing season is longer. One of the things that causes HABs, promotes HABs. So we found that we open it up to the community. The community's engaged the program. They become ambassadors for everything we're trying to do on these important issues, to try to reform policy, to try and engage with policymakers. And you don't have to speak publicly if you don't want to. And you don't really have to. We're not making somebody go monitor at a certain time. It's kind of on your own resources and your own time. So that's that. I'm glad you're interested in the program, and if you want to chat with me afterwards, I can give you a little more. Holly has a perspective.
Yeah, I thought I'd give you a perspective of, I've been a waterkeeper ranger for about a year, and the initial training was really awesome. The rangers that are really active, some of them do have boats, and the hope is that a lot of us would have boats, but not all of us do. But the due diligence that's instilled in each one of us from the very beginning of our training keeps us students. So I probably take at least a webinar or 2 a week that's recommended by our waterkeeper, John Cassani, or suggested to attend, to understand. And some of those are sponsored by the Waterkeeper Alliance. Some of them are by our Florida DEP. But we all learn the language of water. What is a basin management plan? What is a BMAP? There's a lot of things to learn in order to be an advocate. So for me, it's ongoing education is part of being a good waterkeeper ranger. And I'm really proud of some of our rangers because they're out there and we're testing. This entire watershed is huge, huge. And we're working on a common database. And the question about how to get the results, if there's cyanobacteria in the water today, aren't always going to be easy for you to find until we get the DEP to bring those statistics up to date in their public websites. So it's a work in progress, right?
Yeah, a couple of dangling parts there that, again, Ruth and Jim, who run our board of directors now, started out as one of our first classes of our Rangers, and they've kind of adopted us, and we're so glad they did. They're just doing marvelous work. And there are opportunities for members. I think we probably have a few open seats on our board of directors, and we'd like to talk to you if you have an interest. And we found that we grew very, very fast. We went from a following on Facebook from like less than 100 to almost 8,000 in just a year and a half. So we're growing extremely fast. Our science-based approach gives people confidence in our business model, and but we're finding that we're spread so thin right now that we need that help on the board, really. And even it's not a donation thing, it's just, you show up once a month and help us with formulating some strategies. And you all have asked such good questions, and I know all of you are part of the Yacht Club, I think, so almost everybody here is a boater. The Rangers are our eyes on the water. We do provide some basic sampling equipment, a Secchi disc, and when we have more resources, we'll help with a better equipment as we go. So it's a win-win thing. It's one thing you can feel good about in this day and age where it just seems like the challenges are just overwhelming right now. Yeah, and the narrative, I do a lot of these presentations, and I always get the same questions and always the same perceptions. And what a lot of people may not be aware of is that every urban development is required to treat some volume of stormwater runoff from their property before it leaves their property. It's supposed to be a regulatory program, it's permitted. Ag doesn't have to do that. And it's not to say that urban areas don't contribute. They contribute in a big way. I could go into that further, but I won't. And I hate to keep pointing the finger at agriculture because I've always kind of aspired to be a farmer, but no, seriously, I think it's a great occupation. But in that basin north of the lake, that is the watershed for the lake, and that's where about 97% of all the pollutants come in. So that's a very good observation. A lot of dairy farms. The biggest single source of phosphorus loading is improved pasture, and not just sugar or row crops. Okay, so that's where it's coming from. I'm sure what's coming down the Kissimmee is adding, but we just haven't done a good job with agriculture, dairy, and some of the other operations, cattle operations in that basin. They're good stewards of the land typically, but there's just too much nitrogen, phosphorus runoff from those land use types. So the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recognized that problem, and they made a consensus document to the governor a few weeks ago. And so they're trying to get away from voluntary best management practices in that basin, and it's going to be a real struggle because, just because. And so, if you've lived in Florida long, you know that agriculture has significant influence on our legislature. That may even be an understatement. So progress is a little bit slow in some respects. Not all of them. There has been advancements, there has been progress, but it's been too slow. And the other thing that's killing us right now is we're just overwhelmed with growth again. So for every pound or two that we take out of nitrogen, phosphorus, probably putting 2.5, 3 back in. And you never hear the narrative in the net change through time. You only hear about how much it goes down. That's a big frustration to me as an advocate on policy reform, is the messaging and the narrative is a little bit biased. And everybody wants to be an optimist, but with a science background, I have to see the numbers, I have to see the data, and I'm just not seeing it that substantiates that we're making big net improvements through time. Still a big challenge. Yeah, we're so concerned about it that we filed a petition in the state's Division of Administrative Hearings to get Florida Department of Environmental Protection to adopt water quality standards for 2 of these cyanotoxins. One of the big reasons that FDOH just is dragging their feet on this in terms of implementing a statewide policy is there's no numeric thresholds, none in Florida. It's all discretionary, and that's a huge, huge problem. And this is why so many people have so much anxiety about this. When you hear these neurologists talk, and if you're around the water a lot, even within a mile or 2 of the water, there is measurable risk. And chronic exposure is really, it's not acute exposure, it's chronic. So it's a little bit over a long period of time that's really potentially damaging, especially with microcystin, which is a liver dysfunction toxin, not a neurotoxin like brevetoxin from red tide. So it's an insidious problem. And FDEP feels that if they give the toxin data to FDOH, that they're going to expect that FDOH will issue a public health advisory. That's not happening. On the east coast of Florida, the various county health departments, every county has a health department. They close the beach. You cannot go to the beach when it gets that bad. Here, you can't even find a sign hardly. It's very, very disappointing. And I'm sorry, I'm giving it to you straight, but it's just terribly frustrating. I even have some personal experience with respiratory issues. You know, been an endurance athlete all my life, and for the first time last year, and that's why I asked people up front, hey, were you here last summer? Did you have to walk away from the water to avoid vomiting? I mean, it's that bad in many cases. It's not funny. I was doing an interview with a national news media source. I had to walk away because the aerosols and the aromas like nothing I've ever experienced before. We'll probably be in federal court in the Southern District of Florida in March regarding the lake regulation schedule. So we've given the federal agencies, the service agencies, 60-day notice last December. They asked for more time because of the federal shutdown. We gave them another 6 months, and we just couldn't come to any agreement. And I don't want to get too deep into that. But yes, the lake regulation schedule was to be revised when new information became available. The current schedule started in '08, so do the math. We're 8-9 years overdue for a new schedule. And these communities are experiencing significant public health risk and significant economic damage. And it's creating a jeopardy situation for species that are on the edge, that are right on the edge. Small-tooth sawfish is the first one that comes to mind. So that's what we're doing to try to address it. Should have been done years and years ago. And you can probably guess what influence kept the status quo in place for so long. We're nonprofits, I don't like to get too political, so, but I think you can probably figure that out. So we need a new schedule, and hopefully it will be coming soon. The Corps says it's going to take 4 more years, so that's probably why we're going to be in court in March. So.
I mean, the Army Corps of Engineers typically would say they're just following the rules. They don't have any latitude. They can't affect the release schedule. But I think partly because of the lawsuit that we brought, they did exercise. They found some bandwidth. They exercised some discretion where they said they didn't have the ability to do that prior, and I think that has helped. I think it helped this year because we didn't have cyanobacteria to the extent it covered the lake last year, but as you saw in the movie, we had about 25 to 30% of the lake covered with cyanobacteria, and the fact that there were less discharges, I think, helped measurably. So we're actually pretty pleased with that. They lowered the lake, and the Big Sugar was not happy about that. They're concerned that they're not going to have the water they need this winter, but that's creeping toward shared adversity. You know. And the Big Sugar we sued them for too many discharges. Big Sugar sued the Army Corps for too few discharges.
the key thing is the blackout, the June through September blackout. I'm guessing your golf course does that. So the Caloosahatchee estuary, this water body right out here, was verified impaired for nutrient pollution in 2009. Not making great progress on that. There have been some collaboration and some projects to reduce nutrients, but the loading reduction targets were based on 2004 land use. And so everything that's occurred as an increase in loading since 2004 is not part of the equation. So they claim, we're doing better, and that's just a paper exercise. And that's why we're trying to bring policy reform on a lot of these issues. I'm glad you're looking inward a little bit, and when we go further east in our watershed, it's always the city folks' fault, and then when we go west, it's always ag's fault. And so there's this huge sort of cultural divide between the inland communities and the coastal communities, and it's just ugly, and it's not all based on accurate information, and so it makes the advocacy and the reform really, really hard. And that's why I wish I could give you a more direct answer on the silver bullet that's going to fix it. A big thing for us, and I'm rambling a little bit, I'm sorry for that, but we feel until we fix these long-standing problems, it's vital that communities have effective public health risk notification. And until you know that it's safe or not safe to be in the water from fecal indicator or cyanotoxins or brevetoxins, you at least need to be aware of that. It's only fair that you know and understand what the risk could be. We don't have all the answers. You heard the experts. We don't have all the answers at this point in time. But what we don't know and the potential for the risk just scares the hell out of me. And I've lived here 41 years, and I think about that a lot these days because I'm a lifelong angler and boater, and I like to be on the water. And I think differently about being on the water now than I used to. And maybe that's wrong, but something to think about. So.
How about the future of our drinking water?
Good question. The question was, how about the future of the drinking water? And for cyanotoxins, there's only one public water supply in Lee County that takes water from the surface or near surface, and that's the Olga Water Treatment Plant. And I'll have to give the county some credit for testing for cyanotoxins on a fairly regular basis, and including the finished product. So you heard if you saw the Toxic Puzzle movie, you saw that the people around Lake Erie couldn't drink the public water supply anymore because they just couldn't get the cyanotoxins out. And every bottled water supplier in a 50-mile radius, the shelves were gone. Every time they announce an advisory, it's a crisis there, it really is. And that's saying nothing about what the public health risk is from neurodegenerative diseases from that.
Is our bottled water that safe too?
I have to be honest with you, I don't. I drink my well water, I test my own well water, and I'm happy with it. I usually carry a bottle with me, but that's just me.
We'll all be over to your house.
Come to my house, we got clean, fresh well water at my house, it's tested.
Yes, sir. Lake Okeechobee, if you made earlier comment that there's 6 feet of that could be dredged, perhaps, if there's that much of accumulation, could we not dredge, or couldn't the Corps of Engineers start removing? I know that they were very concerned about from the, let's call it the false bottom now, or the soft bottom, which is all the pollutants, get rid of them, haul them someplace, let it dry out, and then recycle or do something with it.
Yeah, there's been a couple of attempts over the years. During the historic drought in '07, there was some hydro dredging of the lake. Lake Trafford's been completely hydro-dredged, in case you didn't know that. That was an Army Corps project. The short answer is it's not economically feasible, and there are some secondary impacts that are important. So that muck that's in the lake represents everything that was back pumped from sugar over decades, and everything from Disneyland over decades. What do you think's in that water, in the muck? In most of these large lake, shallow lake, subtropical lakes, these pollutants are banked in the sediments, and you're absolutely right that we should try to target removing those, but where do they go? And addressing the legacy issue is huge. We could stop all external loading to Lake Okeechobee, and it would take, I hate to say this publicly, but it would take decades, and some have said 100 years or more to remove the legacy nutrients that bleed from the sediments every year into the lake. In fact, the internal loading in the lake exceeds all external inputs to the lake every single year. That's how bad it is. That's why we need to address that problem. I've had engineers tell me it's doable, but we'll see.
I asked Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds that very question, and to be fair to Big Sugar, they're not responsible for the whole lake. Most of the north end of the lake is legacy sludge from the Kissimmee. So, but the south end of the lake is probably their gift to us. She said it would cost about $2 billion to dredge, and they don't know where they would put the dredge because that's going to be highly toxic stuff. She said they might create islands in the middle of they're sort of thinking that maybe they'd create islands and try to compact it and keep it contained. But they don't want to do that until they start reducing the nutrient loading coming into the lake, because there's no point in dredging the lake if it's being loaded to the extent that it is currently. So they want to try to get that under control before they address the secondary issue, which is that sludge on the bottom of the lake.
I just have a quick quote, and I believe it's from visionary and economist Paul Hawken. And what Paul Hawken said is, until we get regenerative agriculture right, we're never going to solve our water problem. And that's a quote that I think about a lot. And it's a big challenge. It's not an answer, but I think it's truth.
I mean, there are so many issues. I mean, some great stuff has come up tonight. The question about the north of the lake and how that contributes, the question of Big Sugar, question of what we can do locally. It's kind of a big picture. So we have to work on it on a number of different levels at the same time. There's stuff we can do locally. I mean, there's stuff we can do in our homes and in our workplaces and in the golf courses. There is stuff we can do. We can talk to our legislators. We can get informed. We can get educated, and so we know more about what the real issues are. So we don't spout, conspiracy theories. We're very science-based. So we're really driven by the science. We're driven by a lot of the knowledge that John has of having worked in these waterways for 40 years. So we try to put out kind of hard data. Most of the journalists in town, whether it's Wink or Fox, they have John on speed dial. Every time something happens, they call John. So he's on the air a lot. He's on the news a lot, like every week. We've done 100 community presentations in the last 12 months. Our membership has grown from 79 about a year and a half ago to almost 400. That's really, really been helpful to us because it gives us a little more wherewithal to do the programs that we're trying to do. We're a nonprofit, and so we're out there, batting doubles and triples every day. This is a long-term challenge. We have found that a lot of people are now turning out and they're getting tuned into this issue. If there's any hope for trying to create a sea change, it's you guys, you folks, turning out and sitting here and trying to be interested and to hear more and try to educate yourselves. That is what can make a difference ultimately. So we have time for one more question.
I have a question regarding eating the fish. With regard, I know blue-green algae is one type of toxin, and then you have the red tide toxin. Can you elaborate about the toxicity of the fish and what stages?
So the semi-official word from FWC on fish consumption regarding, for example, brevetoxin from red tide, it tends to accumulate in the mucus coat on the outside and the skin. I'm hearing that it's okay to eat the flesh, but avoid anything related to the gills or the organs. So, you know, when I see a 25-foot whale shark wash up dead that succumbed to brevetoxin on Sanibel last summer, I'm thinking, I'm not eating the fish. And here's the other thing too that'll make you think a little bit more about this. Right now, the wildlife clinics are full of seabirds that have been eating fish where brevetoxin's been bioaccumulating through time. So, you know, cyanotoxin's a little different. We need more research on cyanotoxins and how it affects fish consumption. But there is microcystin does bioaccumulate, and microcystin is a super stable molecule. You can boil microcystin and you don't reduce the half-life that much. So its half-life is pretty long. So, you know, these are big public health challenges. I just wish our agencies could be more definitive in how they provide public health risk information. And it's trial by fire now. So, you know, if you tell somebody you can't eat them and then they get sick and they can prove it, and then it becomes a personal injury liability issue in court. That's what they're trying, I think, desperately to avoid. So it's a complicated situation. I love fried grouper. It's like my favorite all-time food. Fried grouper, coleslaw, and cold beers. And to say I can't eat grouper anymore is just, and I still do, and I think moderation's part of it. I think just, you know, don't eat. If you're very young or very old, be more careful. If you're a pregnant woman, be extremely careful. But just moderation's probably the best thing right now.
We did oh, sorry.
So I did have patients who were experiencing abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting. Just don't eat it, especially from the local fisheries, from the local family-owned businesses. If it's from a major food chain, that's fine. The FDA inspect them and everything. But the patient ended up in ER and they were released. And
we are a 501c3, which is he reminded me that that's an IRS tax status. That's not a business operating philosophy. And as I walked through here, I was amazed at how many of you had your checkbook out and your credit cards out. Casey, would you like to share a little bit about how these people could become a member of the Calusa Waterkeeper, keeping in mind the end of the year is only 6 weeks away?
Well, we're attacking this problem in a number of different ways. We did an economic summit where we brought in people from the Visitor Convention Bureau, from marinas, from charter fishing, from ecotourism, from real estate, to come and sit around a table and discuss these issues last year when we were slammed. And then we did a regulatory policy town hall for about 500 people, where we started try to explore what kind of regulatory changes do we need to start changing stuff on the political side. And then we got back to public health. So we've been attacking this on a number of different levels, but we can only do that if we have a certain amount of support from the community. We're really, really invested in public health right now, so we're doing a big effort on that. And your support is really, really essential. We occasionally change things up. So next Saturday, this coming Saturday, we're doing a culture night with 6 storytellers. Mr. Woodring was with us in April when we did our first Calusa Culture Night and told us some stories about his 3 generations out on Sanibel. So that was a beautiful experience. And this Saturday, we're doing it again. So if you feel like getting involved, that might be an opportunity. The Commodore bought a foretop on behalf of the landing, so we're really grateful to him. But if you want to do that, just go to our website. It's calusawaterkeeper.org or our Facebook page, which is just Calusa Waterkeeper. Become a member. Join us next Saturday. We've got 6 storytellers, music, art on the walls, and it's all kind of celebrating the culture of music. So that'll be a way for you to get directly involved this coming Saturday. We still have some tickets left. And yes, please do think about becoming a member. If you're interested in the Ranger program, there's information about that on our website. So thank you, Bruce, for bringing that up. That would be really, really welcome. There's envelopes on your chairs. There's also this card that talks about Saturday's event. It's going to be a fun night. So we would really love to see some of you with us this coming Saturday. We're like the David, and the Goliath is the enormity of this problem. So we need a few more pebbles in our slingshots, and you guys could be helpful in that regard. We're making a lot of progress. We're happy with the evolution that we've seen, but your help is going to be really, really critical in getting us to where we'd like to be.
I want to thank you all for being here. The panelists will stick around if you have any questions. I know there were some more that we didn't get to, but thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you for those great questions.